Our next guest is going to be continuing this theme of art and design and how it impacts with what all of us do every day. Stephen Kenn has long been inspired by very simple, clean design aesthetics. You look at his work and you see, at least those of us of a certain age, see reflections of the 50s, 60s, early 70s. In 2011, he and his wife founded a furniture making studio in Los Angeles, from which he's released a variety of collections. I'd urge you to go online and I'll talk about that to just look at the stuff. It's absolutely gorgeous, but it's also made with very clean and everyday materials that I think all of us can relate to. He's going to talk a little bit this morning about how good design can be both simple, functional, and effective. Join me in welcoming Stephen Kenn.
Thank you. Good morning. It's really good to be with you guys, and it really is an honor for me. I want to talk to you today, and I want to challenge you with a thought. But before I do that, I want to convey just how much of a deep appreciation and respect I have for art. I believe art to be incredibly broad and yet very specific, really conceptual, and yet it can be incredibly literal. It's also very it can be up for interpretation, and it's incredibly subjective. I myself would love to participate more in art in this next season in my life, more fine art. And so to do that, one of the things that I like to do is try and define something. And so a couple of months ago, I was driving around in my truck, and I was thinking about art, and I was trying to figure out how to distill it down into its simplest form. And what I came up with is this definition for myself, that art is the manifestation of an idea, bringing something to life. Now, if you'll adopt that definition, just for at least the 20 minutes or so that I'm up here, I'd like to build upon that and say that good art is the manifestation of a good idea. But then what makes great art? Art that literally stops us in our tracks, our jaws drop, our eyes seem to bulge out of our head, and there's something that connects with us, maybe on a deep emotional level or a deep spiritual level, and we just feel like there's truth being spoken to us. Sometimes this art comes in the form of humor, where you feel like this artist gets something about who I am, and I've never told anybody that. Or it can come in the form of hope for an entire group of people who are incredibly broken. This type of art that I would consider great art, I believe is the manifestation of conviction. When an artist feels something so deep inside of them that they can't not act upon it. And so I want you to just hang on to that phrase, that definition that I've created for myself to think about art, because I want to return to it a little bit later. But first, I want to tell you about myself. My wife and I own and operate a small design studio in downtown Los Angeles. Our primary focus is furniture and leather bags, and we've been doing this for about 4 years. But before that, my kind of journey as an entrepreneur started 11 years ago up in Canada. My best friend Steve and I, we loved the idea of brands having an influence in culture. And a lot of our friends were silk screening t-shirts in their garages, and we were gripped by this idea that we should try to do the hard thing, something that required us to need help from other people. And so as random as it sounds, we just decided, let's not make t-shirts, let's make jeans. We don't know anybody making jeans, let's try that. And there's my friend Steve and I. And we decided to start by going to thrift stores and buying pairs of jeans. We would take them apart seam by seam, we'd lay them out on the ground, and we'd figure out the patterns, and then we'd start cutting them up and we'd sew them back together, start altering the fits. We found a manufacturer in Montreal that was willing to make 300 pairs of jeans for us. That was their minimum. And we took a loan out from my friend's uncle, and we decided to buy the jeans. Now, the jeans didn't come bagged and tagged, ready to be sold. They came in this raw form where we had to do a lot of the processing to them. Now, again, we didn't have any idea what we were doing whatsoever. And that naivety, I believe, was our greatest asset at that point, because we weren't waiting for permission, we were just kind of doing. And so we started to plan a party. We said, if we're gonna launch this company, we're gonna invite all of our friends and family, and we're gonna tell them what we're up to. And that party took about 6 months to plan. We had DJs, and we had bands, and we had a big canvas that we wanted people to contribute art onto, and we had food. And the jeans ended up coming 6 days before the party. And if you know anything about manufacturing, you have to count on everything going wrong and everything being late. And we didn't know this at all. We thought we'd have about 2 months. So these jeans arrive, but we were driven, and we said, all right, we're gonna stay up all night, we're gonna make these things. So I would literally put the jeans on my body and take sandpaper and hand sand in these creases. We filled up shopping carts full of bleach. We basically took over a laundromat, locked the door, we snuck in tint, and we were tinting the jeans. We were blowing out the knees, and we were patching the knees of all the jeans. And our whole goal was that every single pair of jeans would be different. We loved this idea of wearing art, which is really funny to think of now. But yeah, that's Steve and I back there in our little pink shirts. And we went to a trade show in Las Vegas a couple months later after our launch party. And we're sitting in our booth with shirts that say, "Hi, I'm Steve." And if you're gonna start a clothing company, I do not recommend this. But it was where we were at. We were just thinking, we just wanna find a way to connect with people. And a lot of people who walked into our booth were from Los Angeles, and they said the same thing over and over. "What the heck are you guys doing making jeans in Canada?" We were like, "I don't know, man. This is where we live." And so we decided, we gotta go to LA. We gotta figure out actually how this whole thing works. So we loaded up our car full of jeans. We drove down to LA. Upon getting to LA, sleeping on the floor of total strangers, doing pop-up shops in Whole Foods parking lots out of the trunk of our car, and knocking on doors of some of the best retailers in LA, we finally got an order from a store called Fred Siegel within about 3 weeks. And we took that order to a manufacturer, and we said, "Look, people like these jeans. What do you think?" And he said, "Here's $5,000. I want you guys to come back on Monday. Let's start making these jeans together." So we called our parents, and we said, "I think we're gonna stay in LA, and we might come back." They thought we were absolutely crazy, and we probably were. So that company was called Iron Army, and we did that for about 3 years. It was an incredible learning experience. The thing that kind of ended that brand is that we were focused a little bit too much on creating a brand and less about building a business. That was pretty much my takeaway from that experience. Now, towards the end of that, another company called Hudson Jeans, they saw what we were doing, and they said, "You guys are doing something that's unique and fresh and interesting, and why don't you join us, and we'll build a new brand together. We're really good at the business side of things." So that was a good kind of partnership for us. Unfortunately, that was a very short shelf life for that brand. We called it City of Others. And when the economy crashed, they were forced to focus on their parent company. And I was kind of left in a place feeling like I had failed. And it was very kind of an emotional place for me where I thought, was this just a big mistake? Have I kind of come down here and it's been a fun ride, but it's time to go home? And so I carried a journal and a Bible around with me, and I would just kind of cruise around the city, and I would kind of just think, and I would write things down. And I wandered into this big warehouse full of military fabric that I had kind of discovered a couple years earlier. And I remembered where it was. And this place is one of the truest forms of a museum that I've ever seen. You can walk around and you can pick up an old duffel bag or a pair of boots or a tent, and you can kind of examine it and then put it off to its side. And I climbed up this huge pile of this fabric, and I'm sitting there, and I'm reading and I'm journaling, and I stumbled upon this verse from Colossians 3, verse 23. And it talked about our bodies being the temple of the Holy Spirit. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just feeling wrecked. And I feel like, why would God choose to dwell in me, and who created me? And I felt like I'm sitting on this fabric, and this fabric was used for something incredibly significant in history, and it's sitting here just getting dusty. And And so I felt this deep conviction to take this fabric and to make something beautiful out of it. And so I began to think about, what if I did the same thing with taking apart the jeans, and I took apart these old duffel bags, and I make new bags out of them for people to put their most significant possessions inside of them. And so I started a company called Temple Bags. And the goal of this company was to sew a bag a day for an entire year. Don't you love when we're like ambitious and we like say, I'm gonna do this? So I set out to do that, and I ended up making about 90 bags over the course of about 6 months. And towards the end of that, a friend came alongside me and he said, I love what you're doing. Let me come together with you and let's turn this into a company and let's run it together. And so I ended up selling the brand to him. And we did it for about 2 years, and it was an incredible learning experience about manufacturing things locally in downtown LA and telling great stories. That too came to an end. And yet, that time, I wasn't as broken. I still had hope, and I decided to kind of gather what I had learned from those past experiences, coupled with the people who I've met, and continue on. And so I decided to come up with something that I call my greater narrative, which is in some ways my North Star. That if I feel like I'm going through a transition in my life, I return to this mantra, and it reminds me of what I want to be doing and where I want to be going. And that is that I want to live with an active curiosity, I want to pursue excellence with authenticity, and I want to help cultivate local and global community. And so I told my wife, this is my greater narrative. And she said, great, what are you going to do? And I said, as random as it was to kind of decide to make jeans, I said to her, I think I want to make furniture. And she said, great, we have $4,000, knock yourself out. And so I took that, and I developed what we called the Inheritance Collection, which was steel welded frames that we rusted, and then we took these belts and we wrapped them through the frames and we tightened them, and then upon this kind of bed of tension, we put upholstery. We originally started with military tents as the upholstery, and it's kind of evolved and grown into a bunch of different material stories. And at that same time, I had some friends who were starting a film company, and they wanted to tell great stories. And so they came alongside me and said, hey, can we just follow you around for a day, visit your contractors with you, and then listen to you? I said, sure, come along. And they ended up kind of piecing together and articulating exactly what I was trying to do. I wanted to take the light off of myself and onto these skilled artisans and craftsmen who I had the opportunity to work with over the years and tell their story. And so from there, about a year later, I had this kind of stirring to start making bags again. And yet this time I wanted to choose the material of leather, because I feel like leather is a material that tends to never wear out, but it only ever wears in. It has this patina and it ages over time, and it gets more beautiful with its imperfections. And I was kind of captivated by this idea of passing an object on from one generation to the next. And I felt like bags had the opportunity to do that. And so I called my friends up again and I said, with the Inheritance Collection, we focused on how we're making these products. With the Encounter Collection, I want to talk more about why we're creating these products. And I really encourage you guys to check out that short film that they created for us. Now, with that, those were the 2 collections that we've done so far, and I really hope to continue making more collections. And yet I want there to be a through line. And so for myself, I kind of created a design philosophy that would, again, keep anchoring me towards what it is that I enjoy about design. And what I came up with is that good design should embody the simplest, most functional form, and that the materials used should tell stories from the past and wear well into the future. And I wanted to share that with people. And if you go back to my greater narrative, the last part is to help cultivate local and global community. And I think the local is incredibly important. And so my wife and I turned the back of our ground level loft in downtown LA into a little showroom coffee shop where we have a roll-up garage door. And we decided when we started this company, we're gonna serve coffee to anybody who wants to come hang out with us. And so for the first 7 months, from 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock in the morning, we'd roll up our garage door and we would just serve coffee. And we got into these incredible conversations where I would share my design philosophy, then I would listen to other people, and there was just so much momentum that formed. People would share their ideas with me and then almost like kind of break into tears being like, I've never told anybody this before. Or they'd be like, I think you should do this. And I would turn around and be like, I think you should do it because it's your idea. And it was so fun. And so that kind of, we got so busy that we couldn't continue doing that. So we took a little bit of a break, but then we came back to it and we started doing coffee on Monday mornings and cocktails on Friday night. And we did that for about 7 months. And the same thing kind of happened in a whole new way. And now the next version of that is going to happen this summer, where we're turning that same little space into a little retail shop that we're calling Summer Shop. And a lot of the products that we're selling are actually made from friends who we met in that beginning stage, who have kind of like got their companies up and running. This is some pictures from Backdoor Coffee Club, like we called it. Now, that's kind of my story, but I want to kind of challenge you guys. If you're interested in this idea of forming a greater narrative for your life, there's two things that I would like to kind of recommend that really helped me. I believe that we need to fight comparison. Comparison is something that robs us from our greatest contribution. And it's very easy to look at somebody else's life and emulate what they're doing because you see success. And yet, there is a story that's inside each one of us that's very unique, and it's beautiful, and there's going to be pain, and there's going to be failure, and it's going to be hard, but it's going to develop, and it's going to grow if you let it. The second thing is to value our imaginations. I think constantly we are being bombarded by social media, by entertainment, by news. Constantly there's this conversation that we're having with culture, and if we don't take time to be quiet and still and think, I think that we're going to lose our own perspective and our own creativity. And so value your imagination. Now, oops. So my challenge for you, I said in the beginning that I wanted to challenge you. The reason I talked about art in the beginning, saying that great art is the manifestation of conviction, is because I want to see more great art happen in the world, and I want to participate in that way. I want to manifest it from a place of conviction. And I encourage you guys to discover what it is that you want to see more of happen in the world, and then manifest it from a place of conviction. Thank you.
I'm fascinated by that notion of narrative that you talked about, so I want to tug on that for just a minute or two. People wait for permission, right? They need someone else to validate them before going off and doing something. You didn't. You were fairly audacious about it 3 or 4 times over.
Yeah.
So, for anybody out there, and this was actually a question that came up, we really do use this. How should they approach that? How do they just start to create and shape their own narrative without waiting for that permission?
Yeah. I honestly think it's that imagination thing. It's being quiet and it's asking yourself the question of it's like, what bothers me? Or what do I want to see more of? And then answering it, journaling, sitting and thinking, and then talking to people, and then writing to-do lists, and then crossing things off your to-do list. And then you're literally a month of doing that every single day, and you are so much closer to your dream or your thing that you want to pursue than you were a month ago.
So let's take that and let's apply that to, say, your decision to start making furniture.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine that there are many sofa manufacturers out there saying, how can I create furniture that tells a story? And yet you've done that brilliantly using, recycled World War II tents, using, hand-dyed denim. What was that process like that led you to those fairly unusual places?
Yeah, I mean, being around manufacturing and seeing like an assembly line of so many things, like when we would make jeans, I'd be like, oh, this is like almost like sick. And I know that we're tiny in the grand scheme of like what people are manufacturing. And yet I felt like I don't want to add more stuff into the world, but I believe that the world needs more hopeful stories. And so if we can pair hopeful narrative with great design, I think people get to not only use an object that functions really well in their life, but it reminds them of something that's very important.
So you've collaborated with a number of other artists and designers over the years. I'm fascinated by the work you've done with Toko Keisei. He doesn't even describe himself as a designer. He talks about himself as a maker.
Yeah.
What does that mean, and why did that impress you so much?
Well, I mean, so Toke has a company in Japan called Truck Furniture, and my wife and I were traveling over there, and we got to meet him. And he came up to me, and we started talking, and within minutes of finding out that I made furniture as well, he wanted to see it, and then he saw it, and he's like, I know this, I've seen this before. And then he spent 3 hours with us. Well, people came up to him constantly asking him, oh, can you like sign off on this? Can you weigh in on this? And he just gave us focused attention. And he's one of the most humble people I've ever met, and I kept looking at what he's doing, saying, how did you build this? And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, you have a furniture company and you're cranking and there's lots of people and you have a restaurant across the street. Like, how did this happen? He's like, we just made it. We just made it. And he's just like, he just identifies with like himself as a maker, somebody who just has an idea, he puts it into action, and he produces things.
So he's clearly been successful at striking the right balance, right, between art and commerce. You know, you've succeeded in doing that after a couple times where things didn't work out. How should all of these people think about, you know, striking that right balance, producing stuff that's genuine and authentic, but also can in fact succeed and scale over time?
I think it's difficult to try and approach it from a place of like, what do I do in order to succeed? But I think to think, what is it that is very true and authentic to me, and being okay with it not being wildly successful, but having there be something that is fulfilling outside of, I don't know, people liking it necessarily. I think
that almost gets back to that trap of comparison you were talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important to push ourselves towards excellence. And I think when we create something that we truly believe is excellent, there's going to be hundreds, thousands more people who agree with that. And they'll buy it, and it works. I don't know.
So trying to tug things up a level almost. We're talking about art this morning, but all through the conference, we're really talking about broader themes of impact and influence. So if there's somebody out there, a social entrepreneur, or somebody who does have an idea on how to create a business that does good as it does well, how should they think? You know, you're brilliant about applying design thinking to these very disparate areas. How should they be thinking about the role of design, you know, what it can play to help them achieve their goals?
Well, I mean, I think design is less about just making something beautiful, but it's more thinking through the entire system and really making the entire experience beautiful. And with somebody who maybe is creating a social platform or something like that, it's thinking through the entire user experience and trying to think, is this easy? Is this fun? Is this something that people would want to share?
Is it useful almost?
Yeah, is it useful?
Simple?
Like, would I want to use it?
So apply that. I mean, I'm thinking of one of your bags, a traveling cocktail kit. You know, tell the story about how that came out, and because it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And yet it's useful, especially if you're stranded in an airport.
So my wife and I, when we travel, she would always kind of take little bottles and put them in a dop kit, and we would take them and we would make cocktails on an airplane. And I think it's legal. I think it doesn't matter really.
If you're not caught, it's not illegal.
And so she said, for Christmas next year, you need to make me one of these. And so I ended up kind of making a version of it for her. And we went to our friends who are very successful with building bars in LA and New York and all around the world. And we told them, this is kind of our idea. What do you think? They were like, we absolutely love it. Let us make the drink menu guide for it. And so we kind of partnered in that way. And for us, it was less about drinking. It was more about getting to surprise somebody who's sitting next to you and saying, hey, can I make you a cocktail? And they look at you like, wait, what? And then you get to kind of open this little recipe book and show them, and you get to craft them something and then share an experience with somebody. So for me, using design in that way was about creating a relationship with somebody who maybe you otherwise wouldn't get a chance to meet.
It's a fascinating process, and thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Yeah.